and Linnam Goddard. She's the president and CEO of Child Fund International. It's a global child development organization dedicated to helping children in poverty gain the opportunity to bring positive change to their communities. Her first-hand experience living in and traveling in developing countries has given her insight into a world that few Americans get a chance to see. Raised by an Irish family who immigrated to the United States when she was 3, Goddard has spent a lifetime working to improve conditions for children throughout the globe. She served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Kenya, where she lived, and she was recently, she's been profiled in People magazine, Parent magazine, among many other outlets, and she was recently named the 2011 Influential Woman of Virginia by the Virginia Lawyers Media. Please welcome Anne. How are you? Nice to see you.
How are
Thank
you? Wow, they're right. It is bright up here. I hope I can see you all, but I think we should all vote Mary Margaret as Influential Child of the Year. What do you think? I thought she was great. I want to thank Charles for that very kind introduction, and many thanks for all those who have organized Richmond Unite and for inviting Child Fund International here today to be a part of what I think is a really innovative, very innovative event. It's been terrific since I've been here. I've met some old friends, but I bet you some of you are new friends. Child Fund has been based here in Richmond since our founding almost 75 years ago. But some of you might not know us in Richmond. But that wouldn't surprise me because our work is really very international. Sometimes we are known better in places like Guatemala City, Nairobi, Jakarta, than in our hometown of Richmond, but Richmond is our hometown and we're very proud of that. Let me tell you a little bit about what our organization does and who we are. As mentioned by Charles a little bit, we work in 31 countries around the world. We assist on every year about 15 million children and family members, regardless of race, creed, or religion, or gender. Now, if you knew about Child Fund, if all you knew about Child Fund was that one sentence, 31 countries, 15 million kids, you might think, what are we doing at a conference that's all about disruption? After all, helping kids in far-off lands, that's been going on for like 100 years, right? It's not disruptive. It's more traditional, like Mom and the flag and apple pie. But the fact is, we're actually a pretty damn disruptive bunch at Child Fund International. While our name has changed a couple times since we were founded here in 1938, the word child or children has always been a critical part of our name. And empowering the lives of young people has always been our mission. Early on, the heart of what we did was enabling individual donors to contribute a set amount of money each month to sponsor an orphaned child in China. That approach continues today. But what began as a modest effort to build and operate orphanages in one country has evolved into a global force working for children. But we want to help children not only survive, but to thrive in ways that allow them to become leaders who bring positive, innovative change in their communities, in their countries, and in our world. We do this through preparation and mitigation. We prepare young people for the future through life skills, education, skill building, civic engagement, and we mitigate the risks they face by changing the environments where they grow up. To put it a little bit more bluntly, to help kids in the communities they grow up in, Child Fund International is in the business of disrupting poverty. Let me explain. I learned very little. I hope I learned a little. I learned very early that what is going to make a real difference in the lives of kids, you're not going to do that without disrupting things. And I learned it in a very painful way. As it was mentioned, 30 years ago, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Kenya. It was my first experience living in a developing world. I lived in a mud hut, no bathroom, no running water, no electricity. I learned that poverty isn't something you can fully convey in a photo, though we're trying. It's the sights, the sounds, the smells. It's the touch, the feel. It's the stories of real individual people. Like one mother spending a day trying to get clean water or any water for her children and failing. Or another mother losing her first 11 children to tetanus because people use old razor blades to cut the umbilical cord. Part of my job as a Peace Corps volunteer involved going around the village and visiting people in their homes, something I love doing. But in one home, I saw a little girl who was extremely malnourished. She was about 4, but she looked like she was only about 2. I visited her many times, and during those visits, I came to slowly realize, and with horror, that this little girl was starving to death. Now, people in my village were poor, but they weren't that poor. They weren't dying from hunger. So I set out to learn what was going on with this little girl. I found out that the parents had divorced. Divorce had all kinds of effects there in that country, in that culture. In this case, the father took custody, and the mother was cut out of the picture. Then the father remarried, and the new wife wanted this child from the earlier marriage out of the house. So the father sent his little daughter to live in the village and paid an old woman a little bit to take care of her. I provided some food and tried to help the girl, to change her living arrangements, to give her a chance. But I really got nowhere, and I felt I had failed her. I had to move, and I lost contact with the girl, and I never really knew what happened to her, but I feared the worst. That whole situation, even talking about it today, still enrages me. That little girl was starving, her father was nearby, and yet nothing was happening. If I had to trace my life's work in poverty to a moment, that was it. And it was also the moment that I learned that helping children takes more than idealistic volunteers and foreign aid. You also have to learn to disrupt habits, beliefs, and lives. I took that lesson with me from Kenya to Somalia, where I ran a small international nonprofit serving refugees at a time when 1 million desperate people had crossed the border from Ethiopia. I took that lesson with me to Bangladesh, where I headed a women's health and development project. I took it to Indonesia, where I focus on the care and protection of infants and children under 5. And I took it to Egypt, where I was the first female country director for care in its 50-year history in Egypt, a kind of disruption. And of course, I took what I learned about disruption to Child Fund International. And that's why today Child Fund disrupts old ways of thinking, disrupts stereotypes, and disrupts traditional roles and approaches. In doing this, one of the things Child Fund programs has to do is we have to disrupt the traditional place of women. This isn't about exporting some Western feminist ideology, though of course it is true that sisterhood is very, very powerful. But the status of women directly impacts the status of children. Once we looked on the facts on the ground, we knew we had to disrupt the traditional devalued status of women. And here's one of those facts. It's one that surprises a lot of people when they hear about it. India today is a great economic success story, right? New industries, economic growth rates we here in the US would love. Every time you pick up a call center for tech support, you're talking to someone in Bangalore, right? And so on. Yet it turns out that child malnutrition is a lot worse in South Asia, including India, than it is in other countries at similar levels of economic development. When an international think tank investigated the reasons why, you know what they found? The low status of women was responsible for low birth weight and excessively high rate levels of childhood undernutrition. That's exactly why Child Fund International is helping women to disrupt gender stereotypes by giving women new tools and to encourage them to change their conditions within their communities. This includes disrupting the tradition of forcing young girls, even children 10 years of age or younger, into marriage. Child marriage is a huge barrier to girls completing their education and moving out of poverty. In Kenya, for example, early child marriage is particularly common among the Maasai people. We wanted to find a way to disrupt that practice while still being sensitive enough to centuries of cultural tradition and not alienating the local community. That's why when Child Fund opened its Naningoi Child Development Program at boarding school in 1999, we found a way to rescue girls from early marriage by taking a cue from the traditional Maasai dowry practice. It's called Isayata, which means booking girls at or before birth for marriage. Child Fund simply inserts school into the booking tradition as an alternative to marriage. We offer the traditional dowry of livestock or gifts to book the girls for the boarding school instead of booking them for a trip down the aisle. Just as important, while we changed the booking practice, we worked to raise community awareness on the importance of education for girls. Community buy-in led to a growth in the school, which generated further community support. Enrollment now is at 900. Remarkable in a community that has traditionally viewed girls' education as a wasted investment. Taking on the traditional roles of women is just a start at Child Fund. We're also about disrupting generational poverty. In the U.S., children here, we tend to inherit family heirlooms, or if we're lucky, money from our family. Even if we can't wait to sell that ugly piece of furniture Aunt Betty left us, or hide that picture of the poker-playing dogs from Grandpa, a true story, true example. Inheritances are usually a good thing, but in far too many areas of the world, the only things that children inherit are hunger, debt, and powerlessness. This happens in several ways. In much of Africa, for example, the poor quality of the soil and continuing drought not only prevent farmers from escaping poverty, they push each new generation further down the economic ladder. 2 weeks ago, I had the chance to return to Kenya, the country, as I said, where my career in international development began, and to see how we're helping to break the pattern of poverty. Early in the visit, I saw nothing but the grim signs of the drought that is gripping the Horn of Africa, which I'm sure you've heard about on the news. We passed through barren landscapes, dusty dirt fields with no signs of water, huge riverbeds that were as dry as baby powder. We watched herds of goats and camels, tired and emaciated, walk through parched land in search of food and water. But then we came to the village on the bank of the Turkwell River, where Child Fund's Food for Assets program, funded by the United Nations World Food Program, is making a real difference. By the way, the villagers were very surprised when I showed up. They hadn't imagined that the president of Child Fund would be a woman. I guess another kind of disruption. Actually, I got carried around like a sports star on somebody's shoulders. It was very unusual. But they were excited to see me in other ways too, because our program there is helping to stop the passage of poverty from one generation to the next by making fields bloom despite widespread drought. We train local communities in techniques for irrigation and how to grow community vegetable gardens. At the same time, we provide families food in exchange for their work to build gravity-fed irrigation system and community vegetable plots. It was really stunning to see smart farming practices and how they can transform a community. In that village, everything was green. In the shambas, or vegetable gardens, I saw women tending spinach, tomatoes, green peppers, peppers, okra, watermelons, kale, maize, and cowpeas. After hours traveling through desert-like conditions, it really felt like we had come to a Garden of Eden. And the children of that village will live better lives than their parents. Child labor is another inheritance forced on many children, and it is a reason for generational poverty. When young children, even children who would be in kindergarten or first grade here, work at subsistence jobs instead of going to school, they never learn the skills and develop the outlook they need to escape poverty and to become positive leaders in their communities. But we're disrupting child labor through programs like Enjoy in Angola. Enjoy means dream. It is bringing schools to areas that have no learning materials, no books, no maps, no trained teachers, nothing at all. Enjoy built or refurbished 26 schools and also partnered with the Angola Teacher Training College to prepare almost 400 teachers for their jobs. We also arranged for meals for the kids at school. Even more importantly, Enjoy staff work with the young people of the community to attract them to school, and they work with parents to convince them of the value of education. And as a result, over 1,000 young people completed the first year of literacy training this year, and most are moving on to level 2. Many of them also took advantage of the life skills and vocational training Enjoy offered. We have begun to disrupt that cycle of poverty through the power of education. Poverty passes from generation to generation because some traditions and beliefs keep young people from realizing their potential. We at Child Fund seek to disrupt those traditions. But as we did with the Maasai, we also try to strike a balance between fostering change and yet keeping the community support we, and most importantly, the children need to thrive in their community. The grandmothers in the Senegalese village of Lauli Nindia are a case in point. In the village, malaria has been a persistent problem. We helped to set up a system of health huts around the area to treat malaria and provide general health care. But despite our best intentions, the women of the village, they avoided the clinic. We couldn't figure it out until we realized that the grandmothers in the village were the trusted health authorities to whom the younger people, younger women, traditionally went to for advice about child care and childbirth. And these ladies, these grandmothers, were skeptical of our modern medical practices. Now, I have to say, my perspective on grandmothers has changed over the years. When I started working overseas in my 20s, village grandmas seemed very old and very ancient. 3 decades later, and I have to admit, obviously, 30 years older myself, I know women of a certain age are mature, not necessarily just old, and with age, thank you very much, with age, that was my husband, I paid him to do that, comes some wisdom. Grandmothers also have tremendous influence within their communities. So we trod very lightly on the grandmothers. We invited them to very respectful education sessions for them. We explained how improved health practices could save the lives of the children and infants they loved. It took a while, but the wise grannies eventually came along and started being advocates for the health huts. The traditional place of women, generational poverty, those are not the only things we disrupt to help young people. Child Fund is also taking on dependency. At one time, most well-meaning folks believed the best way to help poor countries was to get governments to pour money into big showcase projects. Experience has shown, however, that at best, big outside projects provide only temporary help to the country and temporary employment to the young people. The key to creating jobs for young people, jobs that last, and economic growth that continues, is sustainable self-employment. It is quite a contrast to the unemployment problem we face in the U.S. Here the government and all the presidential candidates are looking for ways to encourage companies to hire new workers. Overseas, there aren't any companies in the villages where we work. As a result, struggling societies need projects that provide youth the skills, expertise, confidence, and resources they need to create their own enterprises. Enterprises that meet the unique needs and circumstances of their villages. Sustainable self-employment is exactly what 4 teenage dropouts, Omar, Kadi, Mam, and Lamine, are doing with our help. In the Gambia, Child Fund recruited their 4 boys off the streets and off the soccer fields and provided business training through our Junior Achievement Program. After almost 40 training sessions, they set up a business that produces batik and tie-dye bags and table runners. Their business, their enterprise, is a success and is not only providing them jobs and income, but the 4 now have trained and employed other young people, and they have recruited still others to undergo business training and to go on to create businesses of their own. In addition, empowered by their economic success, Omar, Kadi, Mam, and Lamine have become leaders in an organization for young people that fights against drug and substance abuse and teenage pregnancy. As Lamine, the very young and very proud HR manager, says, "I'm not blaming other people for my failures anymore. Building a business has inspired me to be better, to be a leader, and I want to be a role model for others." In Uganda, another young woman named Millie had to drop out of school because she couldn't afford the fees. Child Fund and local community leaders chose Millie and 19 other youth for training in how to make energy-saving cooking stoves. The stoves are made completely from local materials, very, very local materials: mud, water, grass, and brick. Through building and selling stoves, Millie has not only earned enough to go back to school, she has bought 12 chickens, a goat, and one thing that should make probably most of the people in this room happy and not surprised, she has bought a cell phone. She's helping her community too. The stoves are so much more efficient than the old ones that people are using. They're using much less firewood, families are saving money, and they're protecting the environment. I could tell you about many more wonderful kids who are doing some very fantastic things out there, but I want to conclude by just sharing a few more thoughts about disruption. Many of us at Child Fund International have devoted our entire lives to helping young people. In the end, however, the disruption of poverty won't come from me or anyone like me. It has to come from the local community. And it's not likely to come from the older generation that tends to oppose change. It's going to come from young people who embrace it. By working with young people, Child Fund International is mobilizing the 2 most powerful tools there are for disrupting poverty. The children who grow up poor, but who gain the skills and self-confidence to change their lives, and the people globally who care about them. But to mobilize these extraordinary young people, we have to disrupt one last thing. And in my 30 years of work in this field, I find this to be the biggest barrier to change. It's what some have called compassion fatigue. It is absolutely true that the problems facing the world's children are huge. 1 billion people go to bed hungry every night around the world, and that number is growing. As many as 100 million more people will slip into poverty by the end of this year. And the global economic downturn is certainly contributing to that. I understand that these problems can seem so big that they appear not just daunting, but truly overwhelming. They can cause many people to turn away and throw up their hands in despair. But I'm here to tell you, though, that the faces and the stories which you have seen and heard this afternoon, they are real examples of young people finding hope, becoming leaders, disrupting the status quo, and making a positive difference in their own lives and in their communities. Disruption sometimes isn't fast, sometimes it's not easy, but it is doable if you're willing to disrupt, at times, your own cynicism. These real faces that you see are just the tip of the iceberg of individuals who persevere in disrupting poverty. Child Fund International and other organizations in the field are making a difference. In village after village, country after country, we are helping children and young people to develop the capacity and have the opportunity to thrive at every stage in life. We're helping them to become leaders the world needs for enduring change. So, I want to disrupt your compassion fatigue or even your cynicism by asking each of you to join us in the global movement to disrupt poverty. This is done best not by focusing on big, overwhelming problems, but rather on changing the life of one child. Global disruption can start with individual action. Go to our website, childfund.org, to join this global movement to disrupt poverty by getting involved with an individual child's life through sponsorship. Or pick a specific project that you want to support. And then join the Child Fund family on Facebook and Twitter, connecting with a community of like-minded people who are all about disrupting child poverty for good. Finally, speak out and share your experience with others in your community and encourage them to join this disruptive movement for ending child poverty. I guarantee it, when you change the life of one child, you'll change your world. Thank you very much.